In 79 CE, the Vesuvius volcano erupted and burned down two beautiful cities of the Roman Empire, Pompeii and Herculaneum. Many of you have probably heard about this tragic story. However, few people know that in the middle of the 18th century, archaeologists discovered ancient scrolls from that time amongst the ruins of Herculaneum. For any scientist or historian, such a discovery is a treasure trove that offers insights into the thoughts and lives of people from over 2,000 years ago. However, the problem was that 1,800 scrolls were found in very poor condition, singed by the heat of the volcano, coated in ash and soot. They had become hardened black lumps. Brittle as coal, any careless movement could destroy them. Scientists were aware that invaluable knowledge from an ancient Roman library was concealed within, and endeavored to decipher the texts. One method was to cut the scrolls in half and scrape off the thin layers of solid dust and ashes. Then, the researchers created a special machine that could slowly unroll the scrolls. They managed to read a few words, but unfortunately, such methods damaged and even destroyed some of the artifacts. In those instances, archaeologists could only wait for advancements in technology that would allow them to unfold and read the scrolls. And finally, this day has arrived. Artificial intelligence has now enabled researchers to decipher texts written 2,000 years ago, even though the inscriptions on the scrolls were charred and nearly illegible. Initially, scientists scanned the scrolls and created high-resolution digital models. This process allowed specialists to identify the areas where ancient ink had altered the texture and shape of the papyrus fibers. In the regions where ink was applied, the papyrus was slightly thicker and contained a higher level of carbon, the key component of the ink. The researchers developed a machine learning model capable of detecting these subtle details within the papyrus. They uploaded thousands of 3D images of the scrolls to the internet, inviting people to collaborate with AI in decoding the text. During the early stages, the system occasionally made errors, making human assistance essential. To incentivize participation, scientists and investors from Silicon Valley offered $1 million to anyone who could successfully decode the texts. This initiative significantly accelerated the process, resulting in the deciphering of several passages from the ancient works. Fragments of the first transcripts are like a blog about how to enjoy life. The author of the scroll, Philodemus, was a follower of the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who considered pleasure and luxury the highest goal in his life. So, Philodemus thought so too. We do not right away believe things that are scarce to be absolutely more pleasant than those which are abundant. It feels as if it was written by some modern influencer talking about a detox program or a diet. It seems that people who lived 2,000 years ago were almost the same as modern ones. Philodemus was apparently a wealthy man, because he lived in a villa that may have belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law. In his works, the author criticized the Stoics, who couldn't say anything about pleasure at all. Philodemus was such an ardent fan of Epicureanism that one of the scientists compared him to a guy who collected albums from only one band and nothing else. Several hundred Herculaneum scrolls remain unread. Scientists believe that they may contain works by Aristotle, Homer, Sophocles, and the Stoics. Fortunately, with modern AI technologies, the decryption process will go on much faster. But how did historians and linguists decipher ancient texts in the past centuries? It was actually a very difficult mental job. Let's say you found an ancient slab in the 19th century, somewhere in Greece. To understand what was written there, you'd have to compare it to several other deciphered plates with similar writings of that era or similar languages. Letter by letter, symbol by symbol, you'd be deciphering ancient writings for several months or even years to figure out, say, the recipe for ancient mashed potatoes. Fortunately, with the development of computer technology, those days are long gone. Now, all ancient scrolls can be scanned and uploaded to a database on a computer. You may not even have to decipher the text for a long time if the computer finds a match of characters in other ancient manuscripts. But even if you have a perfectly preserved piece of papyrus or an ancient book where all letters are visible, this doesn't mean that you and AI will be able to decipher it. One of the most famous encrypted texts is the Voynich manuscript. This work, which consists of 240 colorful pages, was acquired by Polish bookseller in 1912. He found that book intriguing because of astrological symbols, unknown plants, and unusual human figures drawn on its pages. And all this was accompanied by handwritten texts. The author had beautiful, clear handwriting, but the language of the book is still unknown. Someone wrote this art book around the beginning of the 15th century and divided it into 6 sections devoted to botany, astronomy, biology, cooking, medicine, and cosmology. Many scientists and linguists have tried to decipher the mysterious drawings with inscriptions, but no one has gotten reliable results. Even AI couldn't help this difficult task. Some believe that this book is dedicated to science, and others believe that it contains knowledge about witchcraft. Perhaps it's a mix of science and magic. According to one version, the manuscript is a medical textbook that copied information from other scientific works from the Middle Ages. Before the invention of the printing press, people copied books and rewrote them by hand without worrying about copyrights. It's possible that the author of the manuscript outlined all their knowledge about herbal medicines and the influence of astrology on health. People in the past believed that the state of the body and stars in the sky were connected. The coolest thing is that the book has been scanned. You can download it in high resolution and try to decrypt it yourself. Who knows? Maybe you will succeed and get some ancient secret knowledge. An unknown language or poor text condition may not always be a problem for linguists. Imagine that you open some copy of classical literature dated to the 19th century. You read the pages carefully, and at the end of the day, you feel slightly unwell. You read the book every day and feel worse and worse. At some point, you go to the hospital, and doctors tell you that you've been poisoned. Yeah, sometimes working with old books can be literally dangerous for your health. There are even catalogs of poisonous books in the world. They are toxic not because someone intentionally sprayed them with poison to hurt the reader, but because people wanted to make books look more colorful. Recently, 2 such books have been withdrawn from the National Library of France because of their bright green covers. The pages were ordinary, but the hardcover could have been coated with arsenic. The mass production of books took place in the 19th century. Book publishers wanted to release as many copies as possible, so they used not expensive leather covers for them, but cheaper fabric options. To make a book attractive to customers, they painted them in bright green, yellow, red, and other colors. They got the green color of the cover thanks to the bright pigment created from copper and arsenic. It was a very cheap dye, but brighter than other dyes containing copper carbonate. An arsenic dye was used not only for books, but also to create candles and wallpaper. The problem was that the dye's pigment decomposed quickly and released toxic carcinogenic fumes. Arsenic caused severe health problems. People calmly lived in their homes and couldn't understand what was happening to them. The same thing happened to many readers of that time. It was only by the end of the 19th century that people stopped selling toxic items. Now, to read a poisonous book, if you want to do it that is, you have to wear gloves and a protective mask. And after work, wash your hands thoroughly. The last time this volcano erupted was about 500 years ago, but recently, small tremors have grown really frequent, to such an extent that scientists have been recording more than 1,000 a month. I'm talking about the Campi Flegrei supervolcano in Italy. At one point, just a few weeks ago, the area was rattled by a 4.4 magnitude earthquake with 150 tremors in just one night. It was the strongest earthquake in over 40 years. A lot of locals spent the night in their cars, but in the morning, the shakes were followed by another earthquake, a bit weaker with a magnitude of 3.6. So, is Italy in danger? Well, the quake itself wasn't big enough to cause serious damage, but it evoked a lot of panic. At the moment, local authorities are working on grandiose emergency plans. If worse comes to worse, they'll have to evacuate hundreds of thousands of people. One of the reasons is the proximity of this area to Naples with more than 3 million inhabitants. At the moment, they're even considering an option of paying people to leave their homes. Right now, schools remain closed in the Campi Flegrei area. The authorities are allocating more than 500 million euros to ensure the safety of buildings and constructions in the area. A yellow alert is still in place in the region where 80,000 people live. There's the so-called red zone, which is the most dangerous area. There are 1,250 houses in this red zone, and all of them will be at high seismic risk if an eruption begins. Plus, more than twice as many will be at medium risk. Italy is a country prone to seismic activity, and Pozzuoli is a densely populated area that is located on one of the most dangerous supervolcanoes in Europe. Campi Flegrei has 24 hidden underground craters and dwarfs the better-known Vesuvius. Yes, the very volcano that wiped the ancient Roman city of Pompeii off the face of the earth in 79 CE. This city thrived near the base of Mount Vesuvius at the Bay of Naples. In the time of the early Roman Empire, 20,000 people lived in Pompeii. They were merchants, manufacturers, farmers, and others. The soil in the region was rich and fertile, so there were lots of orchards and vineyards. Strangely, no one knew that this black earth was the legacy of an earlier eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The area was a favorite summer destination for rich Romans. Sadly, at noon on August 24, 79 CE, all this prosperity came to an end. The peak of Mount Vesuvius exploded, sending a 10-mile-high mushroom cloud of ash and pumice into the stratosphere. For the next 12 hours, the eruption was wreaking havoc on the city. Volcanic ash and a hail of pumice stones, some of which were 3 inches in diameter, showered Pompeii. It forced the city's occupants to flee in terror. Around 2,000 people holed up in stone structures and cellars, paralyzed by fear. They hoped to wait out the eruption. Who knows? Maybe if they had decided to leave the city immediately after the beginning of the eruption, they would have had some chances to survive. A westerly wind protected the city from the first stages of the eruption. But soon, a giant cloud of hot ash and gas rushed down the western slope of Vesuvius. It engulfed the city, burning everything in its way. This disastrous cloud was followed by a flood of volcanic mud and rock, which completely buried the city. As if the volcano was making sure no one would survive, a cloud of toxic gas poured onto the city, finishing the lives of a few survivors on August 25th. A flow of rock and ash followed. It collapsed roofs and walls and turned the city into a giant cemetery. When a supervolcano erupts, the consequences are usually catastrophic. Supervolcanoes have at least once had an eruption with a volcanic explosivity index of 8, which is the largest recorded number on the index. Supervolcanoes are often extremely large, with no cone at all. That's because they're typically the remains of gigantic magma chambers that once flared up, leaving behind a caldera. They're usually located over hotspots and appear when huge volumes of magma are trying to escape from deep underground. Eventually, they burst through Earth's surface. Sometimes, all this magma gets stuck, unable to break through the planet's crust. And then, massive pools of pressurized magma gather at a depth of several miles. The pressure keeps growing because more and more magma is trying to get to the surface. At one point, a super eruption goes off. The most recent super eruption happened in New Zealand. Well, when I say recent, I meant around 26,500 years ago. That's when a supervolcano beneath the surface of Lake Taupo spewed into the air more than 300 cubic miles of ash and pumice. Imagine 500,000 Great Pyramids of Giza flying up into the air at the same time. That's how incredibly powerful that eruption was. But the most exciting and confusing thing about the eruption was that the Taupo volcano didn't simply go off like many others. At first, everything was going as usual. Tons and tons of pressurized magma had built up under the surface, and the pressure was getting higher and higher. But after the rock cracked and the first portion of lava rushed out of the crater, something went wrong, and the supervolcano took a break. Only several months later, the disastrous eruption shook the ground. Thousands of tons of lava, rocks, and ash flew high into the atmosphere. The unusual pattern of Taupo still confuses scientists. The Indonesian eruption at Toba caldera 75,000 years ago was the largest eruption in the last 2 million years. Experts estimate that the eruption could have released hundreds of thousands of tons of sulfuric acid, which might have even caused a several-degree cooling of the planet's surface. But nowadays, the impact is hard to detect because of glaciers that covered the ground afterward. There are also several so-called supervolcanoes that haven't lived up to this name yet because they've never produced any super eruptions. For example, in 1883, Indonesian volcano Krakatoa went off. The power of the eruption tore the volcano's walls open, and cold seawater rushed into its molten insides. The difference in temperatures made the volcano blow up with a deafening boom. It was clearly heard 3,000 miles away in Australia. It earned the blast the title of the loudest sound in history. But even though the consequences of this event were truly catastrophic, it still turned out not powerful enough to be called a super eruption. It only had a volcanic explosivity index of 6. Then, there's also Mauna Loa. It's a shield volcano, which means it won't produce explosive eruptions, but its sheer size makes this monster of a volcano extremely dangerous. At the moment, the volcano seems to be at peace with its surroundings. Research equipment doesn't show any signs of activity on Mauna Loa, but if Mauna Loa did suddenly erupt, lava flows could reach the ocean and the most populated and touristy places like Captain Cook very fast, in a matter of hours. The last time the volcano erupted, lava got as far as the outskirts of Hilo on the other side of the island. That's where the University of Hawaii is located. Luckily, people had a few weeks' warning to get ready for the disaster. Over its recorded history, Mauna Loa has been erupting pretty regularly, almost every 6 years. On the bright side, big island volcanoes including Mauna Loa aren't really very volatile. That's because they're shield volcanoes. These volcanoes got such a name because they aren't really very high and resemble a warrior's shield placed flat on the ground. Shield volcanoes are formed by very fluid lava. It travels way farther and forms much thinner flows than the lava erupted from a stratovolcano, which is conically shaped and tall, like the infamous Krakatoa in Indonesia. So, if Mauna Loa erupts, there probably won't be ash clouds or tons of debris. The most dangerous thing will be lava. Since Mauna Loa is a shield volcano, its lava is extremely fluid and voluminous, which allows it to flow far and fast.
Only true adventure enthusiasts and experts dare to climb the K2 mountain, and even for them, returning safely is not a given. You can find this peak in the middle of the Karakoram mountain range in northern Pakistan. It was the second one measured during a survey in 1856. That's why it's got a weird name. K2 mountain is 28,000 feet above sea level. This makes it the second highest mountain on Earth, right after Mount Everest. It's also among the most dangerous places. Out of the top 5 highest mountains globally, K2 is the most dangerous, claiming 1 life for every 4 people who reach the top. Avalanches, crazy storms, and tricky slopes make K2 the toughest mountain to climb on the planet. The air is thin. Only 1/3 of the oxygen you can find at sea level is up there on the K2 summit. Storms can last for days, causing lots of trouble. K2 might be a tad shorter than Mount Everest, but it's way harder to climb because of its terrain. Everest has some flat stretches, but K2 is steep almost all the way up. At 24,000 feet, it flattens out a little, but rockfalls and unpredictable weather make this area a real risk zone. Everest might be taller, but K2 is considered more lethal. Everest has a couple of popular routes, like the South Col and the North Ridge. K2, on the other hand, doesn't believe in easy routes. Even the supposedly simple one is steep as heck, averaging 45 degrees from base to summit. While Everest has spots where climbers can chill out, K2 doesn't play that game. Campsites on K2 are tiny compared to those on Everest, and things get wild as you climb higher. On Everest, climbers might sometimes ditch their helmets, especially on less intense sections. But on K2, you better keep that helmet on from the get-go. Rocks are falling, avalanches are happening, safety first. Rescues are a whole different story on K2. The rocky terrain makes it tough to bring down an injured climber. Helicopters aren't readily available, and even if you get one, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. Everest is a bit friendlier in that department. These Nepalese climbers are a big deal on Everest, but not so much on K2. Sherpas are like the superheroes of Everest, helping climbers speed up the ascent. On K2, it's a bit more of a solo mission. Now, let's talk about danger zones. The Khumbu icefall on Everest is gnarly, but K2's bottleneck takes the cake. It's higher, which makes it way riskier. And here's the kicker. There have been years when nobody has reached K2's summit. That's not a thing on Everest. Success rates on Everest are a lot higher. The first attempt to reach the summit was made in 1902 by a team of climbers, but they only got to 21,400 feet. Only in 1954 did an Italian crew with a Pakistani buddy in tow finally conquer K2. That was no easy feat. By August 2022, only around 700 people had reached the top. At least 91 people have lost their lives trying to conquer the peak. Moving on to other extreme places on Earth, like Ethiopia's Danakil Depression. At first glance, it looks like another planet, for example, Mars. Its landscape is a mix of burning salt, volcanic rock, and sulfuric acid, all in shades of yellow and orange. There are springs with bad vibes around the Dalo volcano, one of the many volcanoes in the area. Scientists have recently examined samples from these pools, hoping to find signs of life. But no luck. The DNA levels in these springs are basically non-existent. This makes the Danakil Depression one of the least friendly places for life on our planet. The next extreme zone is Death Valley, California. It's among the hottest spots on our planet. You can cook eggs on the ground there. The highest temperature ever recorded by a weather station in that area was 134 degrees Fahrenheit in 1913. Keep in mind that there's an even hotter ground spot on our planet. It's in the Dashilut Desert in Iran. A NASA satellite measured a temperature of 159 degrees Fahrenheit there in 2005. It's so blazing hot that birds flying through that area sometimes drop from the sky because they can't handle the intense heat. So let's switch from heat to humidity, because we're going to a village called Mawsynram in India. This place is the rain champion of the world. It's got so much rain in a year that if you put Rio de Janeiro's Christ the Redeemer, that huge 98-foot-tall statue there, it would be standing in knee-deep water. This village is in the Kashi Hills. It has 467 inches of rainfall every year. That's like stacking 39 standard cereal boxes, one on top of the other, over the course of a year. Our next one is La Oroya. Living in this city in central Peru is really tough for the 25,000 people calling this place home. The air is filled with dangerous stuff like arsenic, lead, and sulfur dioxide. Even rain is acidic, wrecking local plants. In La Oroya, there's a metal factory that makes things like gold, silver, and cadmium. That factory is the main job provider in the city. Yet, in 2007, experts said that this place was one of the most polluted spots on Earth. People are working hard to clean up the mess and make life better there. Tristan da Cunha in the South Atlantic is the most isolated spot on Earth. It's a tiny bunch of islands with just 246 people living there. There's no place to land a plane. If you want to visit or leave, you're in for a boat ride. It's a 6-day journey all the way from South Africa, about 1,500 to 1,700 miles away. Now, probably the most dangerous place to spend your life is the Pacific islands of Vanuatu. You would be living life on the edge, dodging volcanoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis every day. UN's World Risk Index classifies this place as the riskiest spot to call home. Satellite data says sea levels around Vanuatu have been rising by about 6 millimeters every year since 1993. Plus, in April 2020, the island got smacked by Tropical Cyclone Harold, the worst in 5 years, with harsh winds hitting up to 155 miles per hour. Our next one is a place where loads of people are crammed into a tiny space. Manila in the Philippines has an estimated 184,570 people packed into every square mile. Manila is that crowded because of the city's economic growth in the past 50 years, mostly thanks to its bustling port. More money and jobs mean more people moving in. With people comes pollution and traffic jams, which turn life there into an everyday struggle. Oh, and finding a place to live in Manila is like searching for a needle in a haystack. A massive housing shortage adds even more chaos to the mix. Yakutsk in Russia claims the crown for being the city with the lowest winter temperatures. In 1891, it hit minus 83.9 degrees Fahrenheit. It isn't the coldest place on Earth, though. The Eastern Antarctic Plateau in Antarctica holds that record with minus 137 degrees Fahrenheit. Yakutsk is the coldest city in the world for a few reasons. Firstly, it's far from the sea, with no warm ocean influences. Secondly, a high-pressure system brings frigid air from the Arctic during winter. Sunlight is a rare sight in Yakutsk during winter. The city sits on continuous permafrost, meaning the ground is always frozen, too. Around 355,000 people call Yakutsk home. What's surprising is that this spot cranks up the heat in the summer. In July, the average high temperature reaches 79 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hotter than in London during the same season. Well, that's some wacky weather, huh? The coldest part of our planet, Antarctica, keeps surprising us. Take a look at this waterfall named Blood Falls. Reddish water falls from the white ice. Scientists concluded that the color is related to iron. The water coming from the glacier oxidizes and rusts when it's exposed to oxygen, and the red color occurs. Step on Mount Gandig. It lays eggs. Well, maybe not real eggs, but the stones certainly look like dinosaur eggs. That's why the mountain got its fame. Let's call them stone eggs, formed in one part of the mountain over 500 million years ago. Interestingly, this phenomenon repeats once every 30 years. Eggs come out in various sizes and shades. The stones appear on the surface of the cliff. A study made in the area has revealed that the composition of the stones of the cliff isn't similar to other parts of the mountain. Here, calcareous rocks rule. They're more prone to erosion. They ripen off day by day. It took 3 decades for the stones to get to the egg shape. Yet, it's still a mystery how these rock formations can be so perfectly spherical and smooth. According to scientists, every stone egg has an organic core. They're made of shells, plant remains, fish teeth, and skeletons. Maybe this has something to do with it. Gulu village is close to the stone eggs. Locals believe that these eggs are sacred. Villagers associate it with good fortune. In fact, nearly every family has one of these eggs in their house. Unfortunately, there are only about 70 eggs left, so if you want to see them, you gotta hurry up. The Richat structure is a circular geological phenomenon in the Sahara Desert near Mauritania. It's made out of rocks in layers, and these layers look very much like rings. No wonder the unique structure even got NASA's attention. Up from the sky, the geological feature seems to be swirling and spinning. Scientists are still not sure how these rings got there. Some say it was an asteroid impact. Many others believe that it was a natural geological process. To them, the Richat structure is an uplifted and eroded dome. Geologists often classify it as a domed anticline. The scientists discovered that the rocks at the center are older than the ring-shaped outer rocks, so it seems like the stones have been eroded to flat rock layers. Anyway, there's no valid explanation for this phenomenon, and the 28-mile-long mystery of the Sahara is still to be solved. Number 4 is Rapa Nui, or Isla de Pascua, but I bet you know it as Easter Island. Yeah, it's got 3 names. It was discovered by Jacob Roggeveen, who actually never intended to look for that island. He just casually landed there one Sunday. That's where the name comes from. Jacob was supposed to find Terra Australis. Disclaimer, it's not Australia. This one never existed and was nothing but a hypothetical continent. Plus, he wanted to peek at Davis Land, which was believed to have once been seen by Edward Davis, the pirate, not Edward Davis, the saxophone player. Jacob failed at that too, though nobody ever saw that island except for the pirate Davis. Jacob may have failed to discover some lands he wanted to, but he discovered Easter Island instead. This is an island and special territory of Chile, located in the southeastern Pacific Ocean. It's on my list because nearly 1,000 stone statues called moai were found there. They were created by the Rapa Nui people. Nearly all statues represent gigantic heads, but there are also a small number of figures kneeling with their hands over their stomachs. Each statue represented chiefs or other important members of Easter Island society. To curve those statues, the locals used volcanic stones that were softened. Our next stop is the gateway to the underworld. Nah, don't worry. This is just how people labeled Darvaza gas crater in Turkmenistan. This giant natural gas crater has been there for 5 decades. This crater is continuously burning gases. The president of the country wants experts to find a way to extinguish this continuous firing pit. This site was created by people accidentally in 1971 while working on a natural gas project. Ever since then, the flames have been on, and it's become a tourist attraction. Mysterious constructions are sometimes built in our era, too. We don't have to go millions of years ago to long-gone civilizations. Edward Leedskalnin single-handedly built a structure called Coral Castle in Homestead, Florida. He didn't use any large machinery. He carved and sculpted more than 1,100 tons of coral rock in 28 years until 1951. It's a mystery how he managed to do it all by himself. Leedskalnin sculpted the sedimentary rock into different objects, such as walls, tables, chairs, a fountain, and a sundial. There's of course a legend behind this mystery too. He was inspired to build the structure after being abandoned by his fiancée on their wedding day. Uh-oh, runaway bride. Well, he wanted to prove his love to her and the world, so he wanted to do something extraordinary. Well, he definitely nailed it. Now, let's talk a little bit about the mystery of the Namibian fairy circles. There are millions of circular patches in hundreds of miles, ranging from 10 to 65 feet in diameter. They're called fairy circles because they look like a fairy or an otherworldly creature made them. These are essentially oval-shaped soil surrounded by grass. There are a lot of local beliefs surrounding the creator of these marks, yet science says something else. Biologists and mathematicians have been puzzled by the mystery of the Namibian fairy circles for decades. There is more than one theory to explain this phenomenon. Here's one popular theory. The water is limited in the desert, so plants compete to reach the water. Some plants expand and thrive into a patch, but smaller plants nearby cannot get the necessary water to live. In the end, some vegetation disappears, and the remaining ones stay at the patch's edges. That's why they form such regular distant gaps. What if I tell you that there is a hill in Leh City, India, where, instead of rolling downwards, things roll uphill? It's an optical illusion. The road looks like it's a sloping hill because of its surrounding landscapes, yet the road actually goes down. These kinds of hills are called magnetic hills or gravity hills. Scientific explanations vary. The most common theory says that the hill has such a strong magnetic force that it can pull cars in the vicinity. Now, how about seeing some flaming rocks? Yanartash spread over an area of over 3 square miles. The place is located on a rocky mountain in southwest Turkey near the town of Ciaralea. Yanartash got its name from its appearance. It literally means flaming stone. The rocks have been flaming for at least 2,500 years, and they'll probably keep burning for the coming decades. The mountain where the rocks are is an inactive volcano, so it's full of tiny fumaroles that release gases such as methane. The gas ignites when it comes into contact with oxygen and creates the flaming effect. And by the way, back in the day, sailors used the flames as a natural lighthouse, as it's really close to the sea. Today, it's more of a tourist attraction, though. Hikers love it too. Now, walk on this frozen Lake Abraham in Canada. In winter, the frozen water gets filled with ice bubbles. It looks magical, but these white orbs aren't that safe. They consist of flammable methane gas. Ew. Beauty can be misleading. The next one is from Racetrack Death Valley, USA. There is a dry lake bed with moving rocks. Now these odd rocks look as if they've been pushed or dragged by someone or something. They leave both a trail and a mystery behind. The force behind all this is now understood. Surprise! It's the wind and some ice. Scientists say the wind pushes the rocks during brief windows when the soil is covered with ice. Now, I can't help but notice that many mysterious things on Earth involve stones or rocks, or methane. Which one of these phenomena is your favorite?
If nature had its own movie, it'd be a mix of Avatar and Interstellar. And I'm not even kidding. How else could you explain something as surreal as avalanches that spark blue light or pink lakes? The thing is, these aren't CGI, and I'll show you how Earth manages to pull these off. In October 2024, a guy was lucky enough to be at the right place during the right cold night and got to record a blue avalanche. I mean, it was mainly white, but it quickly flashed a blue light while it was running downhill. Now, scientists aren't totally sure how these blue flashing avalanches happen, but they have some ideas. One part of the mystery comes from a thing called triboluminescence, which is when light is created by rubbing or breaking something. It can happen on many different occasions. One of them is with ice structures. This happens because of friction, like when two things scrape against each other, causing a little bit of sparks to appear. It's a cold light, meaning it doesn't come from heat, just from pressure or movement. Sometimes when ice cracks or breaks under pressure, it can make a tiny electrical charge. When something disturbs ice blocks, making it crack, this ignites a reaction. The trapped ions are charged particles, and when they suddenly get released, they start moving around. This big release of energy is what creates flashes of light. In this case, a blue glow or flash of light. All of this happens absurdly fast, so to actually witness this release of light is super rare. In June of 2024, people in the US witnessed a massive emergence of cicadas that only appear once every 13 or 17 years. Cicadas spend most of their life cycles underground. While they're still nymphs, they can spend multiple years feeding on tree roots. Some species can spend up to 17 years under the earth before they're ready to re-emerge to the surface and officially turn into adults. But 2024, both 13-year and 17-year-old cicadas appeared at the same time. And since 13 and 17 are prime numbers, this event only happens once every 221 years. The forests got absurdly loud. You see, cicadas can sing anywhere as loud as 80 to 120 decibels. They usually sing in groups, which is why it tends to get pretty loud. Someone who actually lived through this event said they could yell at full strength while inside the forest and not hear themselves at all. When cicadas come out of the ground, the male insects produce loud songs by vibrating their abdomens to attract females. With millions of insects from both species singing together, you were in for a real-life natural symphony. Some people mistook these cicadas for locusts and called it an infestation. All the way down in Senegal, Africa, lies a unique lake. Arriving there, you might think you're walking out of a spaceship and into an unknown planet. After all, have you ever seen pink water before? The so-called Lake Retba, or Lac Rose, as known by the locals, has become internationally famous for shining its vivid pink color. And yes, you can swim there if you'd like, but you should know the water is extremely salty. Lake Retba is known to be one of the world's saltiest lakes, with a saline level of about 40%. And in case you're wondering why the water is pink, I assure you this has nothing to do with otherworldly factors. It's actually due to the high levels of salt. The algae, known as Dunaliella salina, is the one responsible for the pink shading. These algae produce red pigments that absorb sunlight, giving the lake its striking pink color. But if you'd like to catch the lake at its brightest color, you should go during the dry season, between the months of November and June. In other months, the rainwater dilutes the pigments and its color becomes less distinct. You can also find a bubblegum pink lake in Western Australia. It was actually crowned as the 10th most otherworldly site in the world. Lake Hillier is shaped like a footprint and measures over 1,900 feet in length. You can really see how the pink stands out next to that deep blue ocean sitting next to it. Hey, look here! Any ideas what this is? Take your wildest guess. Okay, it looks like a river, right? But that doesn't look like water flowing on it. When locals first saw this happening, they didn't know what it was. So, to make things easier, they just called it Sand River. It sure was a good guess, but it turns out that what these people saw is more or less an optical illusion. It's not sand, but it's not exactly water either. You see, in arid environments, it's pretty rare for hails to happen. And in this case, what we're seeing are thousands and thousands of floating hailstones. Simply put, hail is just frozen rain that pours down in the form of small pebbles of ice. Looks pretty magical though, doesn't it? Now, isn't it crazy that something as beautiful as the Northern Lights emerges from a violent encounter? Yep, the so-called Aurora Borealis is actually the result of solar storms. Here's how it works. The sun, the giant ball of gas, sometimes throws out bits of plasma into space. When this plasma flies away from the sun, we call it a solar storm. These storms travel through space, passing by planets like Mercury and Venus before reaching Earth. When these intense solar storms hit the Earth's magnetic field, something amazing happens. These particles coming from the sun are captured by Earth's magnetic field. They collide with atoms and molecules in the Earth's atmosphere, and these collisions create auroras, especially near the north and south poles. From where we stand, these flashes look like colorful lights dancing in the sky. But that's not really what's happening. If you zoomed in, you'd see millions of tiny flashes happening super quickly. Oh, and the Northern Lights make sounds too. It's a mix of chirps, crackles, and buzzing noises, like a strange radio signal. And this is the sound of a solar storm crashing into our atmosphere. Does Thor ring any bells? I'm guessing he lives inside this next natural phenomenon. The thing is, sometimes when a volcano erupts, it can be accompanied by huge thunderbolts. Scientists often refer to it as volcanic lightning, and they're still debating as to why this happens. One of their guesses is that when a volcano erupts, it projects charged debris into the atmosphere. These charges then react with other charges already present in the air, which can result in a bolt of lightning. Cool, huh? The first time anyone ever witnessed something like this was during an eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. Last but not least, rainbows. Of course, which is the semicircular one we see most times. If you're lucky, you can witness a full circle rainbow, which usually happens in high altitudes, where the line of the horizon doesn't cut the rainbow in half. Ah yes, there's also the possibility of a lunar rainbow, aka the moonbow, which is a very unusual sight. It happens usually during full moons, when the light of the moon is at its brightest, and it's also perceived as a white arc, outlining the moon's outer rim. Let's just wow here for a moment.
Hidden in an Italian mountain range lies the Apennine Colossus. It might not have been on your travel list until now, but you'll be sure to add it once you hear its story. It's a massive statue located in Tuscany, Italy, that's been turning heads for centuries. It stands a staggering 36 feet tall, which is pretty impressive. The Apennine Colossus was designed as a personification of the Apennine Mountains and was created over 400 years ago by Francesco I de' Medici. And get this, the statue draws inspiration from Roman mythology. If you're lucky enough to visit the Villa Demidoff in Italy, you'll feel the sense of mystery and beauty of the Renaissance gardens, and you'll see the nearby Apennine Colossus seemingly in pain. But don't worry, the statue is doing just fine. It's managed by the local authorities of Florence and is open to the public. When you see the statue, you'll notice that it's depicted as an elderly man crouching down on the shore of the lake in a suggestive and realistic pose. It also seems to be squeezing the head of a sea monster, and water gushes out of the serpent's mouth into the pond in front of the statue. The statue also doesn't have any clothes on and has stalactites in its thick beard. Its long hair shows the fusion of a man and a mountain. To add to the realism, the statue was once able to sweat and weep with water pouring through a network of pipes running through its body. In the winter, it would sometimes get covered with icicles. If you're planning a visit, the best idea is to take a bus from Florence. Now, the Alps have some secrets of their own. This next story involves a French mountaineer that struck it rich on Mont Blanc. But it wasn't your average gold nugget or diamond ring that he found. No, he stumbled upon a metal box packed to the brim with precious jewels worth about $250,000. Now you might be wondering how in the world such a treasure ended up on the shoulder of Western Europe's highest mountain. It turns out that these gems belonged to a passenger on one of the two Air India planes that crashed there, either in 1950 or 1966. Talk about a blast from the past. Now here's where things get really interesting. Our mountaineer, who was simply trying to conquer the summit, came across this hidden stash poking out of the ice and snow. He could have easily pocketed the loot and gone on his merry way. But instead, he chose to do the right thing and turn it over to the local police. Authorities had to track down the original owner or their family, and it wasn't an easy task. You see, these jewels had been hidden away for over 50 years, and it's anyone's guess who they truly belong to. This isn't the first time that the Alps have given up some of their secrets, though. 1 year prior, 2 climbers found a bag of diplomatic mail from the same plane that had carried the precious jewels. It's amazing to think that all these years later, such artifacts are still popping up on the glacier. Of course, there is a downside to these types of events. Some worry that inexperienced climbers might try to reach the area in search of their own treasures. But let's be honest, folks, climbing areas like Mont Blanc is no walk in the park. It takes skill, experience, and endurance to conquer such a daunting peak. Pack your bags for our next destination, Greece. Have you heard of Davlos Cave? It's located in the Panteli Mountain, just a short distance northeast of Athens, and it's a total hotspot for spooky experiences. Visitors have reported water dripping upward, weird voices, electronics going out of control, glowing orbs, and more. One brave soul recounted venturing into the cave with his infrared camera. He captured what sounded like a choir of voices, chanting in ancient Greek, and even recorded unexplainable apparitions near the cave center. Feeling adventurous? Why not take a trip to Davlos Cave? After driving through a maze of slopes, you'll have to leave your vehicle at the beginning of a dirt road. After walking up the unmarked trail, you'll then enjoy the panoramic views of Athens stretching out to the nearby Gulf. Finally, after about 25 minutes, you'll see a crescent-shaped opening in the rock leading to the cave. Some people that have experienced walking toward the cave remember feeling an intense pull. Once in the cavern itself, they realized they couldn't go much further, as the tunnels leading from the cave had been blocked up. It shouldn't stop you from imagining all the spooky creatures that might be lurking in the shadows. Ooh. Hidden in the Carpathian mountain range in Romania is the Bucigi Sphinx, a fascinating rock formation that looks a lot like its Egyptian counterpart. It's made from a huge block of stone that's been eroded by the wind over a really long time. Now here's where things get pretty cool. The Bucigi Sphinx may only look like the Egyptian Sphinx from a certain angle, But that hasn't stopped people from coming up with all kinds of legends and myths about it. Some say that the Egyptian Sphinx was actually built based on the Bujiji Sphinx, and that there's a time tunnel or energy corridor connecting the two. Others believe that life forms from outside our planet must have built the Sphinx and even established their base on the plateau in the Bujiji Mountains. There's also a legend that claims the Bujiji Sphinx has healing powers. On November 28th, at sunset, the sun's rays supposedly form an energy pyramid around the Sphinx's face, which has a healing effect on those who gather nearby. People come from all over the world to experience this phenomenon and receive good vibrations from the energy pyramid. Some even claim to have been healed by it. Others have claimed to hear the Beach Boys. You know, good vibrations. Never mind. Now, back when we had little knowledge of geology, people used to make up all sorts of stories of how mountains came to be. Mount Fuji makes no exception and has a fascinating myth behind it that's been told for generations in Asia. Once upon a time, there was a struggling farmer. The poor guy couldn't grow anything on his barren land, and his family was suffering. One fateful night, he was jolted awake by an earth-shattering sound. He thought it was the end of the world and woke his family to flee their hut. To their surprise, they witnessed the birth of a massive mountain, the mighty Mount Fuji. It was a miracle. The eruption created fertile soil, and the farmer, along with his family, could finally thrive. He even gave the mountain a cool name, Fujiyama, which translates to never-fading mountain. Japan is located in one of the most lively places on Earth. Yup, it's along the western edge of the Ring of Fire, a big horseshoe-shaped club that circles around the Pacific Ocean, the eastern side of Asia, and the western coast of the Americas. It's a pretty popular spot for all sorts of geological activity, you know, like volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. This may sound like a surprise, but Mount Fuji is actually a volcano. It has a pretty impressive resume, having erupted more than 15 times since the year 781. The last time it did, it was preceded by a massive earthquake of over 8 points on the Richter scale. That last eruption of Mount Fuji happened in 1707. It was so powerful that a nearby village was supposedly lost in the volcanic disaster. For centuries, nobody could confirm if the village ever existed. As time went by, new towns were built on top of the place where the remains of the settlement supposedly were. But in recent years, researchers dug deep and found some volcanic ash and charred remains of buildings, proving that the village and its destruction were, in fact, real. Now the mountain is considered dormant, having had its last signs of volcanic activity in the 1960s. Well, that's a relief.
It's the 15th of January, 2022, 4:47 p.m. local time. It will start any moment. Here, do you feel these jolts? The South Pacific is about to experience one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions ever recorded by modern instruments. The eruption begins at Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'api, an underwater volcano in the Tongan archipelago. The eruption itself is enormous. Its volcanic explosivity index is at least VEI 5, with the maximum being 8. It's as powerful as such historic catastrophes as Mount St. Helens in 1980 and Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. The eruption releases a staggering 2.4 cubic miles of volcanic material and sends over 150 million tons of water vapor into the stratosphere. This amount of water vapor would have been enough to fill 58,000 Olympic swimming pools. Additionally, the eruption generates the fastest underwater currents ever recorded and triggers large tsunamis that struck areas as far as Peru, more than 6,200 miles away from the volcano. And it takes at least 4 lives, with even more missing. But the craziest thing is that just before the eruption, 15 minutes ahead of time, there was a kind of warning. But as it often happens, people simply missed them. 2 seismic stations, about 466 miles away from the volcano, which is pretty far for this kind of thing, picked it up. They figured out it was a Rayleigh wave, which is a type of seismic wave that moves along Earth's surface. this wave was caused by a fracture in the ocean floor, where magma and seawater started to interact under a lot of pressure. That's likely what triggered the eruption. The crazy thing is that normally, volcanic seismic signals are pretty small and can only be detected close to the volcano. But this Rayleigh wave traveled way farther than usual and was much stronger. It means there had to be a massive amount of movement going on beneath the surface before the eruption. While people on the ground didn't feel it, those distant sensors picked it up. And this discovery is great for identifying volcanic threats earlier in the future and for improving early warning systems. If scientists can detect these seismic precursors, they could give a heads up before an eruption happens. That would give people time to evacuate and reduce the chances of injuries or property damage, especially for underwater volcanoes like this one, which can also trigger fatal tsunamis. Now, the eruption was big, but its impact was mostly contained. However, this discovery underlines how important seismic data is for predicting and preparing for these disasters. Even though this precursor wasn't used to issue a warning during this eruption, the idea that we could use this kind of information in real time during future eruptions is really promising, especially for underwater eruptions, which apparently might give us more warning time than we thought. Even though we wouldn't have been able to hear that precursor warning signal, there is a sound so loud it could actually finish you. And while such sounds are incredibly rare, the loudest noise ever recorded was indeed fatal to those who were close enough. On 27 August 1883, the eruption of the Krakatoa volcano in Indonesia created the loudest noise ever measured. It's thought to have been an astonishing 310 decibels at the source. To put this in perspective, a hand drill produces the sound of 98 decibels. The noise produced by a jet engine measures 140 decibels. And the sound of 180 decibels is capable of destroying your hearing tissue. So, the sound Krakatoa produced reached more than 170 decibels at a distance of 100 miles. And sailors aboard a ship just 40 miles from the eruption had their eardrums burst from the sound. The explosion's reverberation was so powerful that it was heard 3,000 miles away. In fact, at a farm in Alice Springs, Australia, over 2,200 miles away, sheep farmers reported hearing what they thought were gunshots. The sound from Krakatoa traveled around the world multiple times. Although no one heard the explosion beyond 3,000 miles, spikes of atmospheric pressure were recorded in places as far away as Canada and England. Those must have been the sound waves produced by the eruption traveling around the globe. Sound above 150 decibels can potentially cause life-threatening harm. In particular, sounds between 170 and 200 decibels can result in lethal conditions, including burst lungs. Anything over 240 decibels could cause fatal injuries, and you don't even want to know what those are. I'll just say that those sometimes happen to cartoon characters, but rarely to people. The scientific explanation behind this is that sound is essentially a wave of pressure, which can travel through both solids and liquids. And, in the case of an incredibly loud sound, pass right through the human body. If the pressure from such a sound is high enough, it can rupture eardrums and internal organs, causing significant and often fatal damage. Now, you probably know how volcanoes sometimes have small earthquakes before they erupt. Well, they often produce this weird sound called a harmonic tremor. The sound kind of hums, and the frequency of the hum gets higher and higher until it suddenly stops just before the volcano erupts. The sound has been recorded at a bunch of volcanoes around the world. But the thing about Redoubt Volcano in Alaska is that its tremor is so intense, people can actually hear it. It's like the volcano is letting out this crazy scream right before the eruption. According to a geophysicist at the University of Washington, the frequency of Redoubt's harmonic tremor is so high that it is barely perceptible as a low bass hum, and that's at its highest pitch. All because the pitch of Redoubt's tremor exceeds that of any other recorded volcano. It questions the limits of the existing models used to explain these phenomena. That's why researchers had to propose a new model to account for these unusually high-pitched tremors. Most volcanoes produce sound when magma bubbles vibrate as they rise through cracks in Earth's crust. But in the case of Redoubt, scientists believe that the harmonic tremor and associated earthquakes occur when magma is forced through a narrow opening under immense pressure. The thick magma sticks to the rock surface inside the conduit, a channel or a pipe that carries magma from a reservoir or chamber to the vent. As the pressure builds, the magma moves upward. This makes it stick again until the pressure forces it to move once more. These sudden movements cause small earthquakes, which, as the pressure increases, occur more rapidly and blend into a continuous rising noise. So it's actually the rocks making the sounds. This new model is important because it could help scientists better understand the eruptive cycles of volcanoes like Redoubt. It could also serve as a limited early warning system. By the time Redoubt began to scream like this, the volcano had already been erupting for a few days. So the tremor might only provide a few minutes or hours of warning before the next explosion. The harmonic tremor at Redoubt reaches an extremely high frequency, then falls eerily silent before the volcano erupts again. This pause occurs when the earthquake activity slows down and the two sides of the fault slip smoothly against one another. Maybe that's when even earthquakes can't keep up anymore. The new model may also apply to other volcanoes, such as the Soufriere Hills volcano on the Caribbean island of Montserrat. The research team is now planning to investigate why the pressure at Redoubt is concentrated in one specific spot. To move ahead in their research, the scientists have created 2 recordings of Redoubt's seismic activity. The first, a 10-second recording, compresses about 10 minutes of seismic sounds and harmonic tremors, sped up 60 times. The second, a 1-minute recording, condenses roughly an hour of activity, including more than 1,600 small earthquakes that had occurred before Redoubt's first explosion with harmonic tremor. These recordings could provide crucial insight into the dynamics of volcanic eruptions and the signals that precede them.
Well, pack your bags and hurry down to Antarctica, because gold is literally raining from the sky there. $6,000 per day. Well, not exactly from the sky, more like from the eruptions of this massive fiery volcano. The towering beast of a mountain is called Erebus. It looms over the icy, lifeless expanse of Antarctica on Ross Island. It shares the spot with 3 neighbors, Mount Terror, Mount Bird, and Mount Terra Nova. Although Erebus is certainly dominating the place, it's about 12,500 feet tall, like 8 Empire State Buildings. Now, even though it's far smaller than Mount Everest, it's still the southernmost active volcano in the world. And even though it stands in the middle of nowhere, Erebus is far from lifeless. It has a terrible temper, actually. Erebus constantly breathes and roars, throwing out gases and chunks of molten rock in crazy tantrums called strombolian eruptions. And among them, it spews out tiny, delicate specks of shimmering gold. And it's not a couple here and there. This money fountain works every day, spewing out nearly a quarter pound of gold per day. Like we mentioned, it's worth over $6,000. It also sums up to a crazy 64 pounds of gold per year, over $2 million. But before you treasure hunters rush there, we have to tell you that these are more like particles of gold. They're often less than 60 micrometers in size and are scattered around, impossible to collect. And when we say scattered around, we mean it. Some of those particles have been found as far as 620 miles away from the volcano, carried in the middle of nowhere by Antarctic winds. Now, Erebus isn't a super friendly place to hang out next to. Its eruptions are wild and unpredictable. So, most of what scientists know about Erebus comes from satellites, which monitor its activity from the safety of space. For scientists, this place is also a gold mine. Erebus is the only volcano that can do this stuff. They figured out that this happens when the magma, superhot semi-molten rock beneath the Earth's surface, rises to the volcanoes. Magma brings some liquid gold with it. The moment it meets the chilly Antarctic air, the gold crystallizes into little pieces, and voila, $2 million per year. Erebus is such a weird and rare volcano. Its fiery heart has been burning for over 1 million years. Over these million years, it's been building layer by layer. Its basis is a super ancient lava, and the upper layers are youngsters. And throughout many years, it's been very active, with a glowing lava lake bubbling at its center. This lava lake is exactly what it sounds, a pool of constantly shifting, burning molten rock. This site is incredibly rare because there are only several lakes like that in the entire world. And this isn't just a pool of rock, it's a window into the volcano's soul. In Erebus, it's made of phonolite. Now, phonolite is a very cool rock. Its name comes from the Greek words for sound and stone. Because, guess what? It's a rock that produces a ringing sound when you strike it. There are only a couple of volcanoes that give it to us. But it's not the only volcano that can flex its weirdness. Oldoyenyo Lengai, a volcano from the East African Rift in northern Tanzania, is even more mysterious. It spews what's called nitrocarbonatite lava. Most volcanoes erupt glowing red-hot rivers of molten rock. But this one erupts dark lava. It flows super fast, like water, creating these thin, fast-moving rivers. So all this makes it look almost like black mud or oil. What's even wilder is that as soon as it hits the air, it starts reacting super fast and turns white within hours. It's like magic, with black lava turning into something that looks like white dust or snow. Not even mentioning that it even glows faintly at night. And it's not that hot either. Well, it's still pretty hot, from about 900 to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But usually, lava temperature can vary from 1,300 to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's cold by volcanic standards. That's because this lava is rich in some strange soda and salt-like, incredibly rare materials: nerorite and gregarite. Nerorite is usually colorless and shiny, looking like small clear crystals or plates. Gregarite is often a bit cloudy. These guys are a geochemical mystery. Deep inside this place, there are two pools of magma. The rare minerals are probably born when carbon-rich parts of magma get separated from the rest, forming these two pools. And while they're fascinating, and we can get tons of them from this volcano, they're also completely useless. They're so rare and fragile that they're impossible to use in anything, even jewelry. Still, even astronomers find this curious. If there are planets out there that are rich in carbon instead of oxygen, like Earth, these minerals could be quite popular there. This volcano also releases a lot of gas, and I mean a lot. It's spewing out carbon dioxide at a speed of about 176 pounds per 1 second. Just think about it, about 5 tons of carbon dioxide per minute. Every minute, that's like several cars worth of gas being pumped out into our atmosphere. Luckily, our planet is used to this volcano, so it's not that dangerous to us. Meanwhile, in the central Andes, far from human reach, Lestaria is having the time of its life. This is also one of the most extraordinary and remote volcanoes in the world. This one is even taller than Erebus, rising to almost 18,700 feet. It's surrounded by a barren, otherworldly landscape. There are literally no humans within 90 miles around it, except for some volcanologists. Lestaria is absolutely wild, constantly breathing out hot gases and steam. The air seems almost alive there, shimmering with plumes of vapor escaping from cracks in the ground. These vents, called fumaroles, are more than just hot steam. They're basically chemical labs. They spit out tons of various gases, all of which react with the air and rock around, and what's left behind is something otherworldly. It's like someone spilled a painter's palette, bright yellows, fiery oranges, and rusty reds. But the wildest part are molten sulfur rivers, streams of bright yellow liquid bubbling and flowing down the sides of a volcano. Some of it is still burning, darkening, like some sort of weird s'mores. All that because the sulfur is getting heated to its melting point by the intense heat below and turns into a thick glowing liquid. Then it starts flowing, cooling, and hardening. You can't tell if you should be fascinated or disgusted by this sight. And if that's not enough to make you feel like you're on another planet, the place itself is just as extreme and crazy. Listaria is perched high on the Altiplano, at the edge of the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth. Pretty much no rain, and temperatures can plummet to minus 11 degrees Fahrenheit. At least some volcanic ash enriches the soil, so there are some hardy plants here and there. The weirdest part is a salt pan nicknamed Lake of Sulphur. It's fed by those sulfur rivers. It shimmers with minerals all along its shores. This lake used to be way higher in ancient times, but now it's just a shadow of its former self. Thousands of years ago, it witnessed a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. The southeastern side of the volcano, a huge part of it, crumbled and fell in an instant. The ground just gave way, and an avalanche of volcanic rock and ash thundered down the slopes. The landslide raced at terrifying speeds, faster than the fiercest storm, tearing apart everything in its path. It tumbled for 5 miles. When the dust settled, all that was left was a massive scar about half a mile wide. We learn this story from the debris around the place. Ash, pumice, and lapilli all are the shattered remnants of the volcano itself, lying now at its base.
The ground suddenly starts shaking. Clouds of gas start forming in the sky, making it dark during broad daylight. Bits of the ground start swelling, lifting, and even collapsing. These are the telltale signs of a volcano that is bound to erupt. And this is what could easily happen again with Mount Spur. It's only about 75 miles from Anchorage, one of Alaska's busiest cities. More than half of the population of the northernmost state of the US live there. There's also a huge amount of air cargo that passes through its international airport daily. So anytime a volcano this close to such a vital hub begins to get restless, people start paying attention. Just FYI, approximately 350 million people in the world live within the danger range of an active volcano. That means that around 1 out of 20 people live in an area at risk of volcanic activity. Alaskans probably wish that Spur's reawakening was fiction, but it's actually true. The Alaska Volcano Observatory picked up on several of these "I'm about to erupt" signs from Mount Spur. So much so that they raised the alert level to yellow, which means unrest above normal background levels. Spur erupted twice in the 90s, and it was pretty intense. If we were ranking volcanic eruptions on a scale from 1 to 10, these eruptions would rank a 6 or 7. Not that terrible, but still worth 10 to 17 million in damages. However, these numbers are nothing compared to Alaska's 1988 Redoubt eruption, another volcano that erupted and summed up a staggering $345 million in damages. Mainly because its ashes hit aircraft engines, such as the KLM 747 that lost power after all its engines went off due to the ashes. If people weren't paying attention to Alaska's unstable geology before that, well, they surely started to after it. When you think of the hazards of volcanic activity, the first thing that might possibly pop in your mind is Pompeii, Italy. Of course, that's the worst-case scenario, a city being engulfed by lava. Spur may seem innocent compared to Vesuvio, but it still took its toll. The last time it erupted in the 90s, and it threw volcanic aerosols over 60,000 feet into the atmosphere. Let's get our science straight here. Think of volcanic aerosols like liquid particles that are released into the atmosphere during an eruption. These particles are usually created when gases from a volcano, such as sulfur dioxide, combine with water and other particles that exist in our atmosphere. These aerosols can actually cool the Earth's surface since they reflect sunlight directly back into space. And that's not the worst part. It can stay in the atmosphere for several years after an eruption, causing lots of health issues. The eruption unleashed blazing fast avalanches of hot gas and ash called pyroclastic flows, along with thick, muddy floods, known as lahars. Oh, and there were also the massive volcanic boulders. These rock chunks were huge, some over 3 feet long, and they blasted out from the volcano like nature's cannonballs, landing more than 6 miles away. All that volcanic heat melted part of a nearby glacier, kicking off debris flows that dammed up the Chakachatna River and created a whole new lake along the valley. Some good came out of Spur's first eruption, though. The main lesson was, volcanic monitoring pays off. The local monitoring was able to reduce the economic damage done by the eruption, especially for a city that has an intense air traffic. Spur is deemed as dormant for the moment, but it could go off anytime soon. You see, volcanoes are classified as active, dormant, or extinct, depending on how much action they're putting on. If it's still active, it's still rumbling and erupting somewhat regularly. Dormant means it's had some recent activity, but it's still lying low for now. And extinct, that's when it's been quiet for such a long time that we figure it's done for good. One of the US's most dangerous active volcanoes is Mount St. Helens. This volcano is actually responsible for the most powerful eruption in US history. Its last blast was so intense, it threw off about 1,300 feet off its summit. Basically, the top of the mountain vanished, and if you thought Mount Spur's ash cloud was impressive, St. Helens wins the competition since it launched its ashes 80,000 feet into the sky. Eastern Washington plunged into total darkness. But it wasn't just that. In a matter of 3 minutes, the eruption hurled 3.7 billion cubic yards of blazing rock and dust, enough to fill 1 million Olympic-sized pools across 230 square miles of lush forest. Actually, the earthquakes that anticipated the eruption started weeks before May 18, 1980. A ground shake of magnitude 5.0 went off, triggering a landslide on one side of the volcano. By the end of the official eruption date, 57 people had lost their lives. Nearly 7,000 big game animals like deer and elk were wiped out, and millions of birds laid scattered on the burnt earth. Researchers don't think St. Helens will blow at the same magnitude again anytime soon, but they're keeping an eye on it, because this volcano is not exactly finished. By the way, the word volcano comes from the Roman name Vulcan, which was the Roman deity of fire, and they often happen at the meeting point of tectonic plates, which are the pieces of the Earth's surface that fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. The so-called Ring of Fire, located in the Pacific Ocean, is the world's danger zone when it comes to volcanoes. It contains between 750 and 915 active volcanoes. The largest volcano located in the Ring of Fire, also the largest active volcano in the world, is the Mauna Loa. It's over 13,000 feet high, and it's located in Hawaii. Researchers say that Mauna Loa has been erupting for at least 700,000 years. Its most recent eruption began on the 27th of November 2022, and it lasted until December 13th. It's been quiet since the 80s until it decided to wake up again. Thanks to constant monitoring by the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, it didn't cause any casualties when it last erupted. Scientists have been investing big time on volcanic monitoring, not only to reduce economic hazards, but also to save lives. The most recent attempt has been to drill into volcanoes. Recently, a group of scientists went all the way to Iceland in one of the world's volcanic hotspots. There are around 33 active volcanoes in Iceland alone, but the one that is the most interesting to them the most is the Krafla volcano. The Krafla has erupted around 30 times in the last 1,000 years, and its most recent eruption was in the mid-1980s. The project named Krafla Magma Testbed, or KMT for short, is hoping to advance the understanding of how magma behaves underground. The main advantage of this drilling research is predicting the risk of eruptions, but it can also help to push geothermal energy forward. I mean, can you imagine having electricity that is run by the limitless source of volcano power? The KMT team will begin drilling holes deep into volcanic ground in 2027. They're aiming at reaching over a mile into the ground. After all, it's different to monitor lava activity when it's on the surface than when it is still below ground. This will allow researchers to listen to the pulse of the Earth, according to them. They're saying this research is as revolutionary as the first time man went to the moon. Oh, and speaking of that, I was shocked to discover that volcanoes exist all throughout the solar system. Yep, other planets and moons have volcanoes too. The largest volcano in our solar system is Olympus Mons on Mars. It's a shield volcano, much like the ones that make up the Hawaiian Islands. It's about 370 miles wide. If we transported it all the way back to Earth, it would almost occupy all of Poland. Yikes. Phew, you can finally send that last report for the day and breathe out. The weekend is around the corner. But just when you're about to hit send, you're alarmed by the low rumbling under your desk. Is it the light rail passing by? Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's a volcano speaking. What, here? In Arizona? That's right, the ground keeps shifting under Arizona, reminding us that Earth is alive. No panic though, let's arm ourselves with some context. 20 American states have extinct, active, and dormant, currently sleeping, volcanoes. Among such states, you can find California, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. On the bright side, Arizona's volcanoes are dormant at the moment, but it doesn't mean they won't go off in the near or not so near future. Now, how about traveling to Arizona to check the traces of its active volcanic past? They dot the desert landscapes of this state like spots dot a Dalmatian. There are entire volcanic fields southwest of Phoenix, east of Douglas, near Flagstaff, north of Kingman, and near the Mexico border. The most worrying thing about these fields is that even though they're not active at the moment, eruptions in this region might happen every 1,000 years or so. Well, the time seems to be up. The last powerful and destructive volcanic eruption occurred around 1,000 years ago at the Sunset Crater. Oh, this place is worth paying more attention to. And we will, but a bit later. First, we have to talk about hotspots. No, not that place where you can surf the web. In our volcanic context, a hotspot is a place where insane amounts of heat melt the overlying crust, Earth's thin outer layer, and form volcanoes. This heat rises from the mantle, which is located between our planet's dense, superheated core and the crust. Want to see an example of this type of volcanism? Welcome to the Hawaiian Islands. The Big Island has its active volcanoes because, at the moment, it's situated on top of the Hawaiian hotspot. The older Hawaiian Islands were once there too, but later they drifted off towards the northwest. It happened because that's where the oceanic crust on top of which they sat, namely the Pacific Plate, moved. Now, look at the world's ocean basins. Yes, they're literally dotted with islands that sit on top of hotspots, like Hawaii, Iceland, Samoa, the Galapagos. Those are probably the most famous examples. But don't think that continents can't host hotspots. They can, but those are far less common. One of the most famous continental hotspots is, I bet you know it. Yep, the one beneath the Yellowstone caldera. By the way, the caldera is a vast volcanic crater, especially one formed as a result of a massive eruption that led to the collapse of the mouth of a volcano. The Yellowstone hotspot is basically the creator of Old Faithful and the rest of the hot springs and mud pots for which the national park is famous. Speaking of Old Faithful, let's make a small detour and pay more attention to this wonder of nature. It's one of the most well-known geysers in the world. People have been coming from all over the globe to see it for more than a century. The cool thing about this geyser is that the likes of it can only form under very specific conditions. That's why they're pretty rare. Magma under the surface superheats pockets of underground water. The pressure there keeps growing until it eventually pushes the water upward with immense strength. A certain volcanic rock with a high silica content lines the tunnel through which this water escapes. Basically, it creates a unique pipe that can withstand unbelievable pressure and heat created by the water erupting above the ground. Old Faithful was the very first named geyser in Yellowstone. If you come to visit it expecting the thing to erupt every hour on the hour, you're gonna be disappointed. On average, Old Faithful erupts every 91 minutes or so, which isn't that bad either. Plus, you can download a special app which will provide you with the approximate time of the next eruption. But be very careful while visiting and stay away from the site. The water erupting from the powerful geyser reaches 204 degrees Fahrenheit. The steam is even more scorching, up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. It's hot enough to bake a cake. But let's get back to our volcanic hotspots. Scientists still don't clearly understand why there aren't many hotspot volcanoes on continental crust. One reason might be that the continental crust is much thicker than the oceanic crust, which is about 4 times as thick on average. Another reason could be that most of Earth's crust, about 2/3 of it, is oceanic. This means that there's less continental crust for hotspots to form under. Now, I bet those of you living in Arizona will appreciate the following info. We'll talk about a volcanic field right in the heart of this state, the San Francisco Volcanic Field. That's a massive area filled with over 600 volcanoes. Yes, they're mostly small, but it doesn't make them any less impressive. They're scattered across 1,800 square miles in northern Arizona, a giant territory. Interestingly, scientists are still debating about whether this volcanic field is actually sitting on top of a hotspot. But one thing they agree upon, the volcanoes in this area get younger as you move east. And this pattern matches up with the North American plate moving west over what could be a stationary hotspot beneath the surface of our planet. Cool, huh? The volcanic hullabaloo in that area started around 6 million years ago. So, in geological terms, it's relatively young. As for the most recent eruption, it happened less than 1,000 years ago. The Sunset Crater, which I mentioned before, the one near Flagstaff, is the most famous vent from that eruption. The Sinagua people had to leave their homes at Wupatki Pueblo because of the eruption. That site is now part of the Wupatki National Monument. There, you can see how people lived in this volcanic region many years ago. If you go to explore this area, you'll notice that most of the volcanoes there are basalt cinder cones, small and steep. The Colorado Plateau has quite dry weather conditions. That's why the volcanoes haven't worn down much. Some of the best examples of those cones, like this one, called the SP crater, still look like they appeared yesterday. But look around. It's not just cinder cones. The San Francisco Volcanic Field also has a stratovolcano, as well as some lava domes that formed from volcanic rocks with more silica than basalt you can find in places like Hawaii. It means they're thicker and don't flow as easily. Anyway, the stratovolcano is going to be one of the most epic sights you'll come across while exploring this volcanic field. Well, not the stratovolcano itself, but the San Francisco peaks, the remains of that giant formation. They stand tall at more than 12,600 feet. That's 4.5 Burj Khalifas placed on top of one another. It makes the peaks some of the biggest landmarks in northern Arizona. They're not only stunning, but also sacred to the Native American people who have lived in the area for many generations. Now, unlike those super active volcanoes in Hawaii, the San Francisco Volcanic Field takes its time, thousands of years between eruptions. But you shouldn't relax just yet. Geologists say another eruption is likely to happen one day. It will probably occur in the remote eastern part of the field, away from big towns. Phew! And if that next eruption is anything like the one that formed Sunset Crater, it would be quite the show. Lava fountains and rivers of lava flowing. At the same time, the next eruption might not happen for centuries, maybe even millennia. Until then, the San Francisco volcanic field will remain a hidden gem of volcanic history, waiting for its next fiery performance. The story of Pompeii is complete chaos as is, but to add a little fuel to this fire, we dug up some groundbreaking facts, and I mean that quite literally. Hear me out. What if it wasn't the scorching sea of lava that destroyed the city of Pompeii, but rather an earthquake that happened during the volcano's eruption? Rewind to over 2,000 years ago. The year is 79 BCE. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon when Mount Vesuvius decided to erupt. Pompeians were going on with their normal daily routines when lava started taking over. The flow of lava was so quick that most people didn't have anywhere to run. The disaster took the lives of around 2,000 people. The lava covered most of the city, which then turned everything to ashes. Pompeii was only discovered during the 16th century of our Common Era, when an architect commended a dig to divert a river. It's a very well-studied site nowadays, but something unusual recently caught the researchers' attention. Scientists were excavating a site called the House of Painters at work. They were examining a couple of skeletons when they saw something weird. The skeletons probably belonged to two men around the age of 50. The analysis showed these men had survived the first surge of lava in the city, but they didn't make it out due to this second unexpected part, the earthquake. The men probably took shelter at the House of Painters at work, but the walls crumbled down when the earthquake hit. The men were found in a protective posture, like they were trying to shield themselves from something that was going to fall above their heads. Plus, these skeletons were not found under the layer of volcanic ash, but on top of it, proving that they really did survive Vesuvius's sea of lava. It turns out this is not as rare as it seems. A volcanologist explained that the seismic activity during the eruption really made things worse in Pompeii. He said that this seismic chaos probably influenced the desperate choices of a lot of Pompeians in their final moments. This is not the first time the world heard of a possible earthquake in Pompeii. A guy named Pliny the Younger, who escaped the disaster and witnessed the whole thing, beat these scientists to it in his famous letters. Pliny the Younger was a lawyer and an important person back in ancient Rome. He was an eyewitness to the whole Pompeii disaster, and he wrote in one of his letters that the eruption was followed by a trembling of the earth. Researchers do agree that something never added up. Pompeii is known to have really well-preserved skeletons since the ashes kind of played an important role in preserving them. But the buildings were in horrible shape, making it hard to reconstruct the entire city as it once was. Pompeii was indeed one of a kind. It was one of the most vibrant and lively cities of the ancient Roman Empire. The city was huge. It could have been home to as many as 30,000 people in its heyday. The House of Faun, for example, was a clear example of how rich Romans lived their lives in Pompeii. It was a huge house that even had 2 gardens inside, taking up the entire block. They looked like they were made of white marble, but it was actually painted stucco. It was clear to researchers that only aristocrats lived there. Then there was this famous forum. This is where most of the administrative part of the city life happened. It was made up of a lot of different buildings, like the Basilica, a hotspot for political and civil meetings, the Macellum, which was a market, and several temples. If we were visiting this back in the day, we'd see a bunch of men dressed in tunics. A few select ones would wear togas, those heavy white pieces of draped cloth that look like bed linen wrapped over the body. Togas were mainly used on special occasions since they were costly, hard to wash, and considered a traditional costume. Representatives running for office would use it during their campaign run so that commoners would identify them as candidates. One can't forget about the Villa of the Mysteries. Cool name, huh? It was called that way because of some mysterious frescoes found inside of it. Modern-day archaeologists still haven't figured out what the scenes painted are trying to depict. Probably some type of ritual or ceremony. By the way, a villa is simply a large suburban Roman-style house. It's not necessarily a super posh place where the rich and beautiful live. It's usually located on the outskirts of town, near the city's walls. The Villa of the Mysteries one, in particular, was found astoundingly well preserved in modern archaeological excavations. It even had a manufacturing area inside of it, like its own little industry. It was common for richer Romans to own big farmlands, like olive gardens, for example. So they would also build a processing station inside their villas to extract the oil and package the whole thing. The amphitheater was where some of the richer men paid to put on gladiator fights for the rest of the town. It was built around 70 BCE, and it was one of the oldest amphitheaters of the world. It was even older than the Colosseum in Rome. This huge building could fit around 20,000 spectators at once. The seating was arranged by social class, so you could easily spot who was a member of the nobility. And in case you're wondering why it was shaped like a weird egg, it's because that was the shape that allowed for an unobstructed view wherever you were in the crowd. As every other Roman city, Pompeii also had some famous baths. Since not every house had access to plumbing back in the day, most people didn't shower in their homes. That's why so many Romans would use public baths, usually at the end of the day, to clean themselves. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a place for bathing, it was a cultural hotspot. The baths were made up of many different rooms. The first one was like a locker room, where people would keep their clothes and personal belongings. This is where the upper and lower classes mingled together. Someone's class could easily be identified by their clothes and jewelry. The amount of gold and silver worn back in those days is nothing compared to what most people wear today. Usually, the rich folks would leave someone to take care of their belongings while they went and took their bath. Because yes, it could happen that stuff went missing while chilling and relaxing. The big focus on self-care nowadays was already a thing for ancient Romans. It was common that before taking a bath, olive oil was rubbed all over the skin. They would scrape off the dirty skin with a strigil. That may sound weird, but also extremely pleasing. The baths had rooms for massages. Some of them had reading rooms, and even courtyards for some healthy exercise. Oh, there was even a natatio, or swimming pool if you're not fluent in Latin. After all, it was the Romans that said, "A healthy body is a healthy mind." The bakeries! Bread was one of the main components of Pompeian diet, so much so that there were around 30 bakeries in the city. Bread was freshly made from scratch every day. In a special area of the shop, the corn or wheat was ground, and mules would circle around to keep the mills going. The funny thing about Pompeians is that they like to cover the exterior walls of buildings with paintings, much like graffiti nowadays. Their paintings, usually frescoes, used to depict what daily life was like in the city. Ancient Romans were very outdoorsy people, so coloring their walls seemed like a good option for them. A lot of houses had frescoes inside of them too, to make up for the lack of windows. The paintings gave the house owners the illusion of more space if the painting was of, let's say, a garden, for example.